The first time my parents met my fiancé's family, nobody said a word for almost a full minute. We were sitting in the private dining room of an expensive restaurant in Portland, Oregon. The room had been reserved for what was supposed to be a simple family dinner before my wedding. I remember feeling nervous, but happy. Daniel sat beside me, holding my hand beneath the table. Across from us were his parents, Richard and Elaine. They were elegant, successful people who had always been polite to me. Richard owned several businesses, while Elaine served on the boards of local charities. At the opposite end of the table sat my parents, George and Linda. My father looked uncomfortable in his old gray suit. My mother kept smoothing the napkin on her lap. I smiled at them. "You're okay, Dad?" He nodded. "I'm fine." But he wasn't. I could tell. My father had been nervous about meeting Daniel's parents from the moment I told him about the dinner. When I asked why, he always gave me the same answer. "Rich people make me nervous." I had laughed. "You're meeting his parents, not the president." He smiled. "I know. But now I understood that there had been another reason. A reason he had never told me." Dinner began normally. Elaine asked my mother about her garden. My mother talked about her roses. Daniel's father asked my father about his old construction business. My father gave short answers. Then Richard noticed my father's watch. His expression changed instantly. It was an old silver watch with a scratched face. My father had worn it for as long as I could remember. Richard stared at it. "Where did you get that?" My father looked down. "This?" Richard nodded. My father hesitated. "My father gave it to me." Richard's face became pale. "That's impossible." I looked at him. "What?" He stood slowly. "Where did you get that watch?" My father removed it from his wrist. "I've had it for decades." Richard stepped closer. "Let me see it." My father handed it to him. Richard turned the watch over. His hands began trembling. There was an inscription on the back. 3 initials. RH. Richard whispered. "That was my father's." Nobody moved. My mother looked at my father. "George." My father said nothing. Richard looked at him. "Where did you get this?" My father lowered his eyes. "Your father gave it to me." Richard's voice became almost a whisper. "When? 25 years ago." Richard took a step backward. Elaine looked confused. "Richard, what's happening?" He didn't answer her. Instead, he looked directly at my father. "You were there." My father closed his eyes. Richard's voice cracked. "You were there that night." My stomach tightened. "What night?" Nobody answered. I looked at Daniel. He looked just as confused. "Dad," he said. Richard ignored him. He was staring at my father as if he had suddenly seen a ghost. Then he said, "You pulled me out." My father looked up. "Yes." Richard covered his mouth. Elaine stood. "Pulled you out of what?" Richard finally turned toward her. "The fire." I felt a chill. "What fire?" Richard looked at me, then at my father, then back at me. "I've spent 25 years trying to find him." "Find who?" "The man who saved my life." I stared at my father. My father looked away. Richard's eyes filled with tears. "That was you." My father nodded. "Yes." Silence filled the room. I couldn't breathe. "You never told me." I whispered. My father looked at me. "I didn't want you involved." "Involved in what?" Richard answered. "Everything." He sat down. The story began to come out in pieces. 25 years earlier, Richard had been a young businessman. He owned a small warehouse outside Portland. The business was struggling. He had borrowed money to expand. Then one night, a fire broke out. Richard had been inside. He became trapped. The building filled with smoke. Everyone outside thought he was dead. But my father had been nearby. He heard someone screaming. He ran inside. He found Richard unconscious. My father carried him out through a collapsing doorway. The fire destroyed nearly everything. Richard survived, but his business was almost finished. He had enormous debts. His wife was pregnant with Daniel's age equivalent at the time. He had nowhere to turn. My father helped him again. He secretly guaranteed a loan. Then, when Richard couldn't repay it, my father sold the family home he had inherited from his own parents. He used the money to keep Richard's business alive. Richard eventually rebuilt everything. His company became successful, then extremely successful. But he never forgot the stranger who had saved him. He had spent years searching for him. "I never knew your name," Richard said. My father looked down. "You didn't need to." Richard shook his head. "You gave me my life." My father didn't answer. I looked at him. "Why didn't you tell us?" He shrugged. "I didn't do it for recognition." Richard's expression changed. "There is something else." My father looked up. "What?" Richard's voice became cold. "The fire wasn't an accident." My mother gasped. I looked at Richard. What do you mean? Richard stared at my father. You knew? My father's face tightened. I suspected. Richard stood. You knew who caused it. My father said nothing. Daniel looked at him. Grandpa, my father finally spoke. Richard's business partner started the fire. Richard nodded. And you took the blame. I didn't take the blame. You let people think you were responsible. I was trying to protect you. Richard slammed his hand on the table. You destroyed your own reputation to protect my company. My father looked at him. I didn't want your family destroyed. Richard's eyes filled with tears. You should have told me. You were rebuilding your life. You had no right to decide that for me. I know. Everyone was silent. Then Richard looked at me. You need to take your parents home. I stared at him. What? They cannot meet my family again. Daniel immediately stood. Dad, what are you talking about? Richard pointed toward the door. I mean it. My heart began pounding. You're banning my parents? Richard looked at me. Yes. Why? Because this isn't over. My father stood. Richard, don't. Richard turned toward him. You should have told them years ago. My mother looked frightened. George, what isn't over? My father didn't answer. Richard's voice became colder. There are people who would destroy everything to keep the truth buried. I looked at Daniel. He looked at his father. What truth? Richard stared at me. The man who caused that fire built the foundation of my family's fortune. My stomach dropped. What? Richard nodded. And he's still alive. My father whispered. Richard. But Richard continued. Your parents are not the people you should be afraid of. He looked toward the restaurant door. They're the people someone else is afraid of. Nobody noticed the man standing outside the private dining room. He had been listening. And when he heard Richard say that the truth was finally coming out, he quietly stepped away. My father saw him. His face changed. Richard. What? My father pointed toward the door. He found us. Richard turned. The hallway was empty. But on the table, beside my father's old watch, someone had left a folded piece of paper. Richard opened it. There were only 7 words. Stop digging, or your daughter pays. Daniel grabbed my hand. My mother began crying. And my father finally looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. Pure fear. I'm sorry, he whispered. For what? He looked toward the door. For bringing this into your life. That was the moment I realized the dinner wasn't simply about 2 families meeting. Someone had been waiting 25 years for my father to tell the truth. And now that the truth was finally coming out, they were willing to destroy anyone standing in their way. I stared at the note on the table. Who wrote that? Nobody answered. My father looked at Richard. Richard looked at my father. Then Daniel stepped between me and the table. Dad, what's going on? Richard took a slow breath. My brother. I frowned. Your brother? My uncle, Daniel said. Richard nodded. My older brother, Thomas. My father looked toward the window. He's the one who started the fire. I felt my stomach turn. Then why is he threatening me? Because he knows your father still has evidence, Richard said. My father shook his head. I destroyed everything. No, Richard replied. You didn't. My father looked at him. Richard reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope. I found this in my father's safe. My father stared at it. What is that? Your original statement. My father's face went pale. Richard opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten document describing the night of the fire. It named Thomas. It described the payments made to the employee who started the blaze. And at the bottom was a signature. Thomas's signature. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Why would your father keep this? Because he knew what Thomas had done. Richard's voice was bitter. My father wanted to expose him, but he died before he could. My mother covered her mouth. So all these years. Richard nodded. My family fortune was built while my uncle lived comfortably from the company. Daniel looked at his father. And Grandpa knew? Yes. Then why didn't he stop him? Fear. The word hung in the room. My father finally spoke. Your grandfather wasn't a coward. Richard looked at him. No. He was protecting the family. Richard shook his head. And look where that protection brought us. I looked at my father. Dad, how many people knew? Very few. Who? He hesitated. Your grandfather. Richard's father. Me. And one other person. Who? My father looked toward the door. The man who helped me get Richard out of the building. Richard's eyes narrowed. You mean Michael? My father nodded. Richard suddenly went still. Michael is dead. No. My father shook his head. He isn't. Everyone stared at him. What? I whispered. My father continued. He disappeared after the fire. Richard looked stunned. I thought he died. He changed his name. Why? Because Thomas threatened him. I felt a chill. So there were two witnesses. Yes. Where is he? My father looked at me. I don't know. That night, Daniel refused to let me leave the restaurant alone. His parents arranged security. My parents went to a hotel. The wedding was supposed to happen in 3 weeks. But suddenly, nobody was talking about flowers or invitations. Everyone was talking about threats. The next morning, Richard called a private investigator. Within hours, they discovered something terrifying. Someone had been following me for weeks. My car had been photographed. My workplace had been watched. Even the restaurant where Daniel and I had our first date had been monitored. I felt sick. Why me? The investigator looked at Richard. Because you're the easiest way to pressure your father. My father stepped forward. No. Richard looked at him. What? My daughter isn't going to be used as leverage. What do you suggest? My father stared at the investigator. We expose everything. The investigator shook his head. That could put everyone at risk. My father looked at me. I spent 25 years protecting this secret. He took a breath. I'm done protecting it. The decision was made. Richard contacted the television station. He agreed to tell the entire story publicly. But before the interview could happen, something unexpected occurred. A television commercial aired. I was sitting at home with Daniel when the screen suddenly showed an old photograph. It was my father. He was carrying a man away from a burning building. The image froze. Then a narrator spoke. Some heroes never ask to be remembered. I stared at the screen. Daniel looked at me. What is this? The commercial continued. My name is Richard Hayes. Richard appeared on screen. 25 years ago, a stranger saved my life. He looked directly into the camera. That stranger was George Carter. My father appeared beside him. I covered my mouth. The commercial showed photographs from the fire. Old newspaper clippings.